Alright, hello everyone, it's Xanderhall, and welcome to a new video. Really quickly, before you mention it, ignore my desk. I know I've got a bit of Asmongold desk going on right now. I promise you there's no mold, but I eat a lot. Sometimes I don't feel like picking up my plates. I'll clean it later, okay? So I don't want to see any fucking cheeky boys in the comments saying, Xanderhall has Asmongold desk. If I see that, I'll fucking ban you, so please keep that out of the comments, alright? I know, alright? Refrain from talking about it, okay? Now, I'm making this video because I kind of want to start doing this after every debate or discussion that I have, because I think it can be very valuable in looking over my rhetoric, my arguments and my beliefs, and learning from my mistakes and my triumphs, I suppose. I've been doing this whole leftist Breadtube debate thing for about a year. Like doing it seriously as a job for less than that. So I definitely don't consider myself to be some kind of like god tier debate lord that knows everything, and I've always sort of prided myself on being willing to change my mind if someone is able to make a good case for why my currently held beliefs or worldview is wrong. I mean, literally my biggest video on my channel, which many of you probably found me through, is my video about my political journey, how I fell down the alt-right pipeline and how I got out of it. And that was literally a story about me realizing that my entire worldview was bad because I heard good enough arguments for it. And me seeing that and deciding I should change my beliefs. Main difference between now and then, though, was that back then I was just an irrelevant gamer boy, no audience whatsoever. There was nothing on the line. I had no pride on the line in changing my beliefs, right? These were privately held positions that I generally didn't talk to anybody about, except for in my close friend group. But now I'm a fairly prominent leftist figure with an audience and a reputation on the line, as well as my own ego and pride, right? So it may not seem like that from the outside, but for me to admit when I'm wrong as a leftist figure with a massive amount of people watching me definitely takes a lot out of me. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk about the how this Korviday drama started and how we sort of got into this whole debate thing. So my first time hearing about Korviday was back when the original ContraPoints Buck Angel drama happened, and I believe Contra actually shouted out Korviday in her video about canceling. I knew Korviday as one of the more reasonable voices in the ContraPoints discourse. You see, the people who are canceling Contra, you know, or criticizing her, sort of varied in degrees of abuse, I guess you could say. You had the people on one end of the spectrum that were like Jamie, or Slightly Sluggy, that name they go by, who you guys may know for accusing Peter Coffin of being a pedophile. You had people like that that were just bad faith and abusive, that were just trying to hurt ContraPoints. And then you had people on the other end that were concerned about her rhetoric and wanted to criticize her. Now, whether or not you agree with the prospect of criticizing ContraPoints, I don't think anyone is beyond criticism, especially not me. So I think Korviday was probably one of the more reasonable voices in that. And it's weird because when I first started having beef with Korviday, it was on Twitter, and I almost thought they were different people. I thought the Korviday I was dealing with on Twitter and the Korviday I saw on YouTube were kind of different, because maybe I'll show some tweets on screen now. A lot of Korviday's tweets, and they admitted this themselves in the debate we had, they seem very, very aggressive, and like they're willing to jump to some pretty massive conclusions. So when I agreed to have a debate with them, and I did a little bit of prep, which granted I didn't do a ton of, and I probably should have done more, I was more prepared to defend against claims like I had a sex cult and I'm an abusive grifter, rather than I think some of your language that is ableist is problematic for this reason and this reason, right? I actually went through Korviday's tweets about me, and I wrote up a document, just of not like any responses or anything, just a list of their claims against me, so I could at least know what the debate was probably going to be about. And there was like one or two tweets that were saying Xanderhall engages in ableism. The vast majority of them is Xanderhall is a transphobic grifter who pretends to be an ally. So when I was preparing for the debate, you know, going over arguments in my head, because that's what I like to do, I like to have like I get in the shower generally, and I think over how the debate might go in my head, and then I have sort of a back and forth dialogue within my head, just sort of prepare for the debate, right? And then when we come out onto the debate, Korviday ends up like laser focusing on this ableist situation, which I'll admit, I think Korviday's convinced me on a fair amount, and I'll get into that a little bit in a moment. But I do want to say there were some things that happened that I feel like I should have done differently. Um, and I feel like Korviday maybe wasn't the best faith in regards to how they went about it. One of the most damning accusations they made towards me on Twitter was regarding the harem drama. I don't want to get into this harem drama very much. I wrote an entire thread about it, and it's my pinned tweet on my Twitter. But the long and short of it is a certain person accused me of grooming fans in a NSFW Discord / harem / sex cult. This accusation has been blown out by literally everybody involved, but there's screenshots, evidence, and everything. I just recommend you go look at the Twitter thing. I'm innocent. It was literally just a false allegation. And I've backed it all up with the evidence, right? But there are a lot of people that seem to want to believe the person who made this accusation for external reasons, because they already had a preconceived bias against me. And Korviday seemed to jump on that bandwagon and made a lot of very strong, I would argue indefensible claims against me on Twitter, and I was really looking forward to talking about those claims on stream. And then Chud Logic and Korviday, when we were actually live, told me, actually, no, the person involved came forward and said that they don't want us talking about the drama on stream, and I don't feel comfortable talking about it. And I feel like that, like, agreeing to those terms was probably my biggest mistake in that debate. This reminded me a lot of a TV show I used to watch a lot in the early 2010s called Raising Hope. For those of you guys that aren't aware, Raising Hope was a show about a guy named Jimmy Chance, who has a one-night stand with a random woman that he meets and gets her pregnant, and shortly after the baby is born, she is discovered to be a notorious serial killer, and is given the death sentence, and she's executed, right? And so the show is about Jimmy, this, teenage or young guy having to raise a child on his own, single parent, but with the help of his mom and dad, who didn't necessarily do a good job raising them on their own, right? And there was an episode, and this is where the analogy is coming around to, there was an episode where it's revealed that the mom of the baby didn't actually die during execution. She somehow survived and sued the state and was let go. And she decided she was going to sue Jimmy for custody of the child, the serial killer. The problem is, one of the deals that she made with the state in the lawsuit, or one of the things that came throughout that outcome, was that in any future court trials or cases, especially the one regarding the custody of the baby, the fact that she is a serial killer is not allowed to be brought up within the court. And whenever the court case happens, Jimmy, the main character, is sort of rationalizing to himself, any jury that's going to be on, sure, we can't talk about the fact that she's a serial killer in the case, but any jury that they're going to bring up is going to know who she is. This was national news. She's a massive, well-known, famous serial killer. They must have been living under a rock to not know about it. And sure enough, the jury is a group of minors who've been, underground and separated from the outside world for 5 years or so. So you've got a jury of people that are completely unaware of the fact that this lady is a serial killer, and she comes on and she makes this very strong case for why she's a better parent and a better fit for the baby than Jimmy Chance and his parents are. Now, I don't remember the exact outcome of that episode, but I do remember the conflict. We had this basic, they weren't allowed to bring up this very, very relevant thing that definitely needs to be discussed in that discussion of the custody situation, and it made Jimmy come out of it looking pretty bad, even though it's a bit more complicated than how it was made out to the public, because they weren't allowed to bring up in the case that she was a serial killer. And I feel like it's a similar case here, though not quite as extreme, in regards to this drama, the harem drama, right? Where Korviday made some very indefensible claims about me on Twitter felt comfortable spreading those claims on their platform, but then sort of was able to weasel out of those claims on stream because they said they weren't comfortable discussing them on the stream because the person involved didn't feel comfortable with us talking about it. Now, if there was a bit more evidence behind the case of the person who has accused me of this, I would probably be way more, like, I would be way more understanding. But literally everybody else involved has spoken out saying this person is a liar, which they are. I mean, there's screenshots of it and everything. I'm not going to go into any details because I don't want this video to be about that drama. Once again, go see my Twitter, read the thread, screenshots, evidence, eyewitness testimony and everything debunking this person's claims are there. But I feel like if I were to redo this debate again, I would have said, no, we're talking about the accusations you made against me. These accusations were massive. I'm not just going to pretend like you didn't accuse me of being like an abuser or like someone who exploits my fans into sexual relationships, and that's not what happened at all. And this claim has been debunked. I really should have pushed more on that. And that's probably one of my biggest mistakes that I made in this debate. In regards to the ableism, though, I think this is where Korviday had the strongest argument, and where I feel I want to go back to the being willing to change my mind when I hear a case that is made that sort of debunks my worldview. So for those of you that aren't aware, I oftentimes on my streams engage in some ableist rhetoric. Now, the response from my community ranges from lol, that's funny, I'm fine with that, to Xanderhall, I think this is really problematic and you should stop. And I have a few reasons for why I engage in this ableist rhetoric. One, utility. I generally think that being able to engage in at least some mild ableism is useful for me to do my job. De-radicalizing reactionaries, right? The issue is people on the right, in the alt-right rabbit hole, they don't expect these edgy white boys to do anything. To change anything. All they gotta do is join their Discord servers, join their communities, watch their YouTubers, and meme really hard and be edgy. They don't expect them to change their language, or change who they are. They expect nothing from them. The way the radicalization happens naturally, but let's say the same edgy white boy wants to come into progressive communities instead, there's a lot that is expected of them, especially if they're, like, edgy. They gotta change a lot of their language. They gotta change a lot of their personality. Now, don't get me wrong, regardless of whether or not we expect this from them, that's just going to happen on their own. They're going to come into these progressive communities, and the other people in these communities are going to round out the edges, in the same way that if they were in alt-right discords, the other edgy people would sharpen that person's edges. But I feel that my content, being willing to at least somewhat dip into problematic rhetoric, gives me a leg up in regards to the type of rhetoric used by reactionaries, right? The idea that the left are a bunch of SJWs that want to censor your free speech and censor your ability to be edgy and be who you really are. I feel like that gave me a pretty big leg up. But, as you guys can probably guess, there's a limit to that, right? I don't want to go too far. There's a reason why I don't just say the N-word or engage in blatant racism on stream. Now, for an example of when I've decided that me being a certain amount of edgy has gone too far, I want to refer back to about 6 months ago. It would have been around September of last year. I used to make a lot of comments about women, you know, generally cis women. I'd be like, oh yeah, she's thick, like whenever I would do, whenever I would like see like an attractive woman on screen, right? And this was generally done in like a really joking way. But a fairly well-known person in my community, Salty Ace, made a video about it, saying, Xanderhall, or at the time I was Pig Puncher, but Xanderhall, I think this is pretty misogynistic and disgusting. It's objectifying, and I think you need to stop. And I watched their video, and they made some pretty damn good points. And I came out of that like, I do feel a little emotionally hurt that I'm being called out by a fan. You know, it hurts my ego, it hurts my pride. But they made some good fucking points. They made some damn good points that I can't argue against. And you know what I did? I changed up my attitude, and I changed up my rhetoric, and I stopped engaging in as much, I suppose you could say, objectification from then on out. And I think that's important, sort of like, not just when it comes to performance and debates, right? Like, obviously, if we go back and we look, if you watch the entirety of the Korviday debate, they did concede a few things to me. One of the bigger ones was the discussion about me and Vosh's relationship. This was sort of a weird thing they did where they speculated on me and Vosh's friendship on this idea that, like, Vosh was trying to distance himself from me because I was becoming too problematic and he's afraid I was going to fall back into the alt-right rabbit hole. They had no evidence to support this. Me and Vosh are very good friends. He's literally offered me money to help me move out to the West Coast and get out of Florida. He's openly talked about our friendship on stream. There was just, I don't know where this was coming from on their end, and they conceded that point. Reasonably so. There was also the ContraPoints thing. They had gotten a clip that was taken out of context that they posted on Twitter that was me, that came off, if you look at it on the surface level without the context, as me, like, speculating about the genitals of ContraPoints, or of trans people broadly, and talking about how trans people's genitals and whether or not I want to fuck them. This is a pretty uncharitable interpretation. In fact, just an incorrect interpretation of what was happening there. I think Korviday conceded this after I explained the full context, and they claimed themselves they aren't the ones that clipped that clip and posted it on Twitter. And I would hope they would take it down, since I literally lost friendships over this because it got passed around so much. But for those that aren't aware, what actually happened was I was responding to a video by Ariel Scarcella in which she strawmanned the progressive position in regards to transphobia and genital preferences. Ariel Scarcella's strawmanned position was that I'm a lesbian, and I don't think that genital preferences are transphobic. And my argument was, okay, this is a straw man. Nobody on the left, or at least most people on the left, I've actually ran into a few people on the left who genuinely think this, but nobody on the left really thinks that your genital preferences and what genitals you're attracted to makes you transphobic. Instead, it's if you see somebody, a trans person, and you see them, and you don't know they're trans, and you are attracted to them, and you'd be totally down to engage in sexual intercourse with them or some sexual activity, but then they tell you, by the way, I'm trans. I used to be a man or a woman or whatever, right? And then that's what turns you off, and that's what makes you go, nope, can't do it. Then yeah, that's transphobic. And I think we can all agree on that. And then I brought up the example of ContraPoints. I said, for example, if I saw ContraPoints, beautiful woman, obviously, I think we all agree on that. I mean, we all simp for Contra. She's the queen. And I were to, like, go to a bar or something and talk to her, and think she's attractive, and then she mentioned she's trans, and that she has a penis, and I were to say, oh, yeah, no, I'm not okay with that, but it wasn't in regards to her genitalia, but her being trans, that would be transphobic. But if it was because I'm not attracted to penises, then it wouldn't necessarily be. And a lot of people thought that was pretty yikes, and I guess the way that it's worded here without the context, it is. But I feel like Korviday conceded this after I pointed out, one, ContraPoints talks about her genitalia all the time in her videos. Like, that's not even a joke. Didn't she sell merch that was literally mouth... Like, one of the running jokes on her channel is mouthfeel, which is literally the sensation of having a trans woman's penis in your mouth. That's like a running joke on her channel. Not only that, but she's been very open about her transition and talks about her, everything from her facial feminization surgery to her hormones to her own genitalia. She talks about this in her videos occasionally. Like, I don't think this is really speculation or, like, inappropriate to discuss. Though I did hear one criticism that I think would hold some water in regards to it's inappropriate to talk about someone who is a peer of yours this way. And my response to that is, me and Contra are pretty chill. She follows me. She's said multiple times she thinks I'm cool. We've talked behind the scenes and publicly. If she took issue with my characterization of that argument, I think she would probably voice that to me. Just judging by how much of Contra that I've seen and how we've interacted, I don't think she would take issue with this. I think the main problem I have with Korviday's characterization of the clip, which was taken dishonestly out of context, was that this was broadly addressing all trans people. I think their tweets went along the lines of, it's not appropriate to speculate on trans people's genitals, trans people are not an anecdote for you to use in an argument, and in regards to that, it was literally me arguing against a TERF who was talking about the genitalia of trans people and genital preferences. I mean, you kind of have to talk about trans people's genitalia when you're arguing against a TERF's argument about trans people's genitalia. I don't really know where to go from there, but they conceded that point, so I guess that's cool. And then finally there was the one on or was that it? I can't remember everything. Um, oh no, the that I'm like an abuser and like a transphobic grifter. They claim that on Twitter multiple times, but then they said I don't actually believe that. And I think it's probably one of the things that threw me off for a loop the most in that stream or in that debate was the fact that they were really aggressive on Twitter and then super reasonable in conversation. I guess that's what I really didn't expect, and like what really threw me off, like the fact that I didn't prepare for the right things. They were going to laser focus on the ableism discussion, as well as the fact that they were very different on stream than they were on Twitter, and that made them look a lot better. If Korviday behaved the way they did on Twitter on the stream, I feel like I would have came out looking a lot better than I did in this discussion, or in this debate, right? But I do want to come around to the ableism discussion. I think Korviday made some pretty good arguments. And I've even said that I do plan on talking to Korviday in private or on stream, depending on what they're cool with, so that they can elaborate on their position, because I do think they have a point. I think there's a lot of utility in me being able to engage in ableist rhetoric, but if it is arguable that a significant amount of my community is uncomfortable with that, and I'm causing demonstrable harm by engaging in that language, especially because disabled people are pretty fucking disadvantaged in society, I think we can all agree on that, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be ableist if it's causing harm. But that is a discussion I want to have. Probably one of my biggest arguments, or probably one of the go-to arguments is, let's say I say something ableist, and someone in my audience who isn't cool with that, whether it be because they're disabled or because they just aren't cool with it, sees that and they decide they aren't going to watch my content anymore. I don't think they're just going to go and move further to the right because of that. They're going to move further left. They're just going to stop watching me. While on the other hand, if some reactionary comes in and sees me, like, being offended by ableism, they're probably going to say, oh wow, SJW is doing what SJWs do, and move further to the right, and just have all of their preconceived biases about progressives reinforced. So it is a discussion I do want to get more into, but I will admit I'm intrigued by Korviday's line of logic with that. And as I said, I like to think I'm a fairly reasonable person. And to be a reasonable person, I think that you have to be willing to change your mind when arguments that disagree with your worldview come up, and you just aren't able to argue with them, and there's good evidence against your beliefs. I guess the final thing I want to acknowledge is the discussion, the discourse that's been happening around this debate. And it seems like people are pretty split straight down the middle as to who won that debate. Now, I feel like this is an issue that stems from people comparing me to Destiny and Vosh a lot. A lot of people like to say, like, compare me to them when my debate style is nothing like them. Even when I argue with reactionaries, except for very niche circumstances when I know the person I'm arguing against is bad faith, I generally try to have a productive discussion where I try to convince the person that I am arguing with to join my position, or at least see the world in the way that I see it. I'm not... With Vosh and Destiny, and they've been open about this, isn't me, like, speculating on their intentions. I mean, Destiny literally said this in an NPR article that he did an interview for, which I was also interviewed for, which was pretty neat. That he said when he debates somebody, he isn't trying to convince the person that he's debating, he's trying to crush the person he's debating, so their audience realizes how stupid that person is. And I presume Vosh does the same thing, based on, you know, how he does his rhetoric and the fact that he is heavily inspired by Destiny. That's not what I want to do, necessarily, barring very specific people, right, that I know are bad faith. Especially if I'm debating a lefty. If I'm debating a fellow lefty, I don't want to, like, crush them and, like, destroy them. That's not my goal. I want to understand where they're coming from. Even if I think they're morally lucky and they didn't necessarily arrive at all their positions because they worked them all out, they just kind of lucked into their good positions, I do want to hear them out, because they're my allies, right? I mean, Korviday, for example, is a non-binary trans person. They're not my enemy. Regardless of them spreading misinformation about me, at least if we boil them down to their identity, they're a part of the groups that I'm advocating for. They're a part of the ideology that I'm advocating for. And I should clarify, I don't defend trans people's rights because of some ideological imperative. I defend it because I like being correct about things. Every position that you see me argue for on my stream, I don't do it because I'm a demagogue that just believes a set of ideas and tries to use confirmation bias to find evidence that supports my already preconceived notions. I look into the data, I look into the arguments, and I come to my conclusions from there. After doing all the research and looking through all the data, the validity of trans people is just backed up medically, sociologically, psychologically, and biologically, just for an example. So, I don't feel like me and Korviday have that many differences besides the ableism stuff and optics. It is something I'm interested to work out, but I don't feel it's healthy to say Xander Hall won this debate or Korviday won this debate, because I've been seeing that. I think I saw somebody say Korviday is like a delusional woke scold something something something. I think that's probably a pretty unhealthy way to look at these things, or look at this debate. And same goes for people who are like, heh, Xander Hall got demolished by Korviday. Which maybe I'm speaking from my own bias, you know. I definitely feel, whenever somebody says something like that, I definitely feel my pride and ego is, you know, bruised, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to see anybody on my end of things saying that Korviday is like a bad person or that they got destroyed. And I would hope Korviday would do the same and say they don't want to see anybody saying the same thing, vice versa, right? Because it seems like Korviday is interested in having a productive conversation and actually changing my mind. And obviously, I've explained my philosophy around debate. I obviously want to change Korviday's mind and have a productive conversation. They're fellow lefties, so that's that, basically. In regards to the ableism stuff, like I said, I will continue to look into it and sort of mull it over in my head while I'm being a gamer boy, you know, playing video games, doing what I do in my free time, and decide whether or not I want to change my rhetoric and sort of reconsider the way I go about these things. And moving forward, might be some changes in regards to how I regard ableist language. We'll see. Maybe not. Maybe. We'll see. I'll work it out. I'll talk to Korviday in private about it. This probably is going to be part of not necessarily a series, but something I want to do off stream and upload after every debate and discussion that I do. Because I think that this is really important. Even though I hate doing it. Even in debates where the consensus is that I, like, blew the person I'm arguing with the fuck out, I hate rewatching my debates because every mistake that I made and every missed opportunity just blinds me. It's just glaring at me, and it makes me really, self-conscious, I guess, and, like, second-guess myself. Something I've had to deal with a lot is imposter syndrome for, like, the last 6 months, especially when people like equate me to Vosh or like call me a grifter or something. I do feel like I get some sort of like onset imposter syndrome, you know, where I feel like I didn't necessarily earn the position that I'm in, right? Like I'm a 20-year-old nearly high school dropout. I barely graduated high school and have no plans and did not pursue any higher education, and I have no plans to. So I do sometimes feel like I'm not deserving of what I have. But regardless of that, I will subject myself to rewatching every debate that I do, every discussion that I have. I mean, I can't say this will be true of everyone, but anyone that's like worth going over, right? That's big enough that it's worth going over. I'll probably do something like this, even if the consensus is that I won, to go over what I did right, what I should have done, and what I did wrong. And I think I had a mix of those in this debate. I guess if we were to go ahead and say, like, oh, who won the debate, which is a toxic way of thinking, of all the discussions that we had, ableism, the ContraPoints thing, the Vosh discussion, and the harem drama, I think I should have brought up the harem drama, and I should have pressed them on that, because they would have had to concede all of that, because the evidence. They conceded the Vosh thing, and even said it was weird of them to speculate on me and Vosh's friendship. And the ContraPoints thing, they said, okay, maybe that was taken kind of out of context and was a little unfairly characterized, which I consider at least a mild concession. And then they seem to kind of like really get me on the ableism stuff. So I guess we can say it was a tie. That's the way I'll look at it if we want to use the toxic win-lose mindset between two lefties debating, but that's not how I'm going to look at it. I think I probably came out of the debate overall looking pretty bad, though. But hey, you win some, you lose some. You learn from your mistakes. I definitely recommend you check out Korviday's videos. They make some good content. Don't check out their Twitter, though. They're really toxic on Twitter. And yeah, I mean, if you're curious about the harem drama, which you definitely should check out because it's just prescient, and I don't want to talk about it on stream or on YouTube because it doesn't deserve that much attention. You can just read my Twitter thread. Debunks all of the claims and everything. It'll fill you in on everything. So yeah. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you want me to do more stuff like this, where I just like go over debates that I do and self-reflect on it off stream so I can sort of focus on my thoughts and not on chat, because holy shit does chat throw me off whenever I'm trying to form a thought. It's actually one of my biggest like pet peeves. I've been thinking about hiding chat from now on, because I always find myself reading chat when I'm trying to form together a sentence, or I end up finding myself reading donations, and it really, really distracts me. So yeah, I don't know. I really like doing this thing where I just talk to the camera, but it doesn't mean I'm going to stop streaming. I'm just going to do this after every major debate. Like I said, don't bring up the fact that I have asthma and gold desk, or I'll fucking ban you. Just kidding, of course, but don't do that, okay? Listen, I'm a gamer boy. I like to have a dirty desk, okay? Thank you. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, leave a comment, sub if you're new. Thank you so much. Xander Hall, out.